Of all types of fictional media, TV is probably the medium where it's most important to have a good ending. After all, the audience has spent hours and hours invested in the story and these characters, and they're gonna want to see plot and character arcs completed. A great TV finale is the ultimate payoff to that investment in both time and emotional labor. The flip side of that, though, is that those same qualities heighten disappointment in a bad TV ending. Audiences want to leave a long story like that feeling like what they watched mattered. And if the finale veers off in an unexpected direction without paying off what came before, it can make the entire investment in the show as a whole feel like a waste of time. But notice that the title of this video isn't TV shows with bad endings, it's TV shows with controversial endings. Over the years, there have been a handful of really odd final episodes of TV that evoked a huge variety of complex emotional responses from its fanbase. Endings like these are often so shocking that those final episodes themselves have a larger cultural impact than the entire rest of the show combined. It can get to the point where people who have never seen the show, and never plan to, often know the specific details of how it ended, thanks to how talked about they are. They're often bold artistic statements that some of the viewers weren't prepared for, or they rejected some critical element of the show that had been present up to that point, or they just weren't able to live up to the hype. But they all have one thing in common: they made a lot of people mad. I'm going to be taking a look at some of those TV shows. Look at the way their final episodes left things, and look back at what came before to see what made these endings garner so much controversy. Then maybe we can figure out a blueprint of sorts to help future shows with this kind of thing. Let's dive in and see what it takes to rock a fanbase to its core. The following is a discussion of TV finales that went in a weird direction. This isn't about shows that were prematurely cancelled, or shows that slowly declined in quality before petering out. I want to talk about the kind of show that dominates the cultural conversation for years, building up huge amounts of critical and commercial acclaim, before ending with a final episode that wipes out all that goodwill in one fell swoop. How does that happen? First of all, as I'm describing this, I know there's one show everyone's thinking of. I almost don't even want to talk about it since it's been covered to death, but I kinda have to. Game of Thrones was possibly the most beloved show of all time when it was running. But the final season crashed and burned so hard that today it's lost almost all cultural relevance outside of bashing the ending and hoping that George R.R. Martin writes a better one for the books. Let's get the obvious stuff out of the way first. The stuff that everyone and their grandma has already said. The show outpaced the books, so instead of having source material to base things off of, they had to work off an outline that Martin gave them, which obviously wasn't going to go too well. Then there's the matter of the showrunners deciding that they were sick of working on the show, so they rushed toward an ending as quickly as possible against the wishes of everyone else involved. Plus, the show had built up a reputation for being subversive and unexpected, so they felt obligated to throw in lots of surprising twists regardless of whether they made sense. All this combined to make a finale that felt like it fast-forwarded through major events that had been built up for a decade or more, twisted character motivations to force them into the most convenient directions for the writers, and wrapped up with what felt like a bunch of nonsensical choices. There's a popular saying among writers about endings that goes, the ending of a story should feel unexpected, but at the same time, inevitable. That sounds paradoxical, and in some ways it is. But it's basically saying that the audience reaction you want to shoot for is, wow, I didn't see that coming, but it feels fitting. Which is not an easy thing to pull off. But the way you do it, traditionally, is to have some kind of plan, a blueprint for where the story is headed, so you can set up details throughout the story that later pay off at the end. The endings of Game of Thrones was definitely unexpected, but it felt pretty dang far from inevitable.
That's just it?
Yeah, that's it. So anyway.
But we've been building towards this for 8 seasons. It's just done with a quick stab.
Sir, I'm gonna need you to get all the way off my back about winter, okay? It's over. We gotta move on.
Oh, I just feel a little empty inside. It feels like this could have been fleshed out.
Well, there's no time. There's only a couple of episodes left.
You can have more episodes if you
I
want.
just don't see any other way other than rushing it.
Most of the storytelling decisions in the final season felt random, out of nowhere. A big portion of this, I think, comes from a lack of planning. The struggle to having to work off a book series that wasn't all finished yet. But there is an element to all this that I haven't seen a lot of people bring up. Even if the writers and showrunners did everything right, is it even possible to write a satisfying ending for this show? Like, consider the story's premise. It's about a cold and unforgiving fantasy world where everyone is constantly fighting one another, and peace feels like an impossibility. The only way for the ending to be satisfying is for Westeros to achieve peace. But the way the plot is set up, it's hard to even conceive of a way for that to happen. I've been around the internet and checked out a few fan rewrites of the final season. My favorite was by Hello Future Me, but I still haven't found a single one that really impressed me. That makes me feel that no, there isn't an obvious, inevitable conclusion to the story. Not even George R.R. Martin has figured out a good ending yet. I suspect that this challenge is part of why it's taken him so long to write the next book. I just don't think there was ever a way to give this story an ending that was anything better than fine. I know we're all sick to death of hearing about Game of Thrones, so I'm gonna move on. Next, let's talk about one of the more infamous TV shows ever made, Lost. Now, I've already made an entire video on Lost. Click the card if you want to see that. So this is going to be a lot of me repeating myself. But here's the gist of what happened with the show. Lost was a huge hit when it first aired, hooking a huge audience with its opening mysteries. A bunch of plane crash survivors are stranded on an island full of weird supernatural stuff. Viewers turned in week after week, year after year, hoping to get an explanation to what exactly this island was all about, as well as a host of other questions about other aspects of the plot, as writers gave out information one crumb at a time. Lost was a pioneer of the mystery box genre, something that I've covered on this channel extensively, and it serves as a great example both of what to do and what not to do when writing a slow burn mystery like this. It worked amazingly well, for a while, but it wouldn't last. Being such a ratings juggernaut, the network kept renewing it until it got to 6 seasons. The show's premise could never support such a long-running story, and even if it could, it's exceedingly clear that when it came to the initial mysteries, the show's writers didn't have an explanation for them in mind when the show started. So the story kept going, and the plot kept adding more new mysteries and subplots and significant details until it got so impossibly huge that there was no way to wrap it all up neatly.
It's the first season of Lost on DVD.
That's the meaning of Christmas?
No, it's a metaphor. It represents lack of payoff.
The final episode was primarily focused on exploring the main characters, giving us a final send-off and concluding their emotional journeys. And character drama was always a massively important part of the show's story, arguably as important as the mysteries, if not more. But as time went on, the mysteries kind of took over, becoming the only thing that anyone seemed to care about. The finale of the show explains some things, but the vast majority of the show's plot was left open in a way that felt unfinished. I've mentioned that I like the finale more than most other people. It's really emotionally resonant, and it wrapped up a lot of the main character arcs. It probably helped that I didn't start the show until after it had ended, and I knew in advance that it didn't explain much, so I was able to take it for what it was and enjoy what it did have to offer. But for most people, if they watched all the way to the end, it was primarily because they were driving themselves crazy trying to figure out all the central mysteries. Since they came for that one thing, and the finale didn't give it to them, well, it's no wonder people lost their minds and decried it as the worst finale of all time.
So that's the reason for everything? A giant cork?
Hi, brother.
You know, considering all we've been through, I was sort of expecting something different.
Okay, so I'm beginning to see a pattern here. Both Game of Thrones and Lost started out without a clear plan for going forward. So when it came to writing an ending, the writers found it hard to improvise a finale. So to avoid a disappointing TV audience, all you have to do is plan your ending in advance. Problem solved. Just kidding, obviously it's not that simple. For one, it's actually pretty rare for a TV show to have the entire plot planned out from the start. The writers and showrunners don't ever know how long or short the show will be, since that can change depending on the show's popularity, which makes planning that far ahead basically impossible. And even with this restriction, there are countless shows that had good endings that weren't planned out far in advance. And as this next example can show us, sometimes planning things too far ahead can actually be harmful. How I Met Your Mother was a revolutionary sitcom that took the formula of shows like Friends and added complex overarching narratives and nonlinear storytelling that kicked the show up a notch when it came to TV comedies. The whole story is told through the framing device of main character Ted in the future telling his children about how he met their mother. Here's a general overview of how the series plays out. The pilot episode opens with Ted falling for a girl named Robin. But right away, the show makes crystal clear that despite the two of them having great chemistry, Robin is not the mother.
Because that, kids, is the true story of how I met your Aunt Robin.
Aunt Robin?
I thought this was how you met Mom.
Will you relax? I'm getting to it.
Ted and Robin have an on-again, off-again relationship throughout the show. But the main thing that keeps driving them apart is that Ted really wants to get married, settle down, and have kids, and Robin isn't about that kind of life. Over time, a relationship develops between Robin and fan-favorite character Barney. The entire final season takes place during Robin and Barney's wedding, and Ted meets the mother at that wedding. Then we fast forward a few decades. We find out that Robin and Barney got divorced after only a few years. Plus, the bombshell reveal that in the present day, the mother has died of some unspecified illness. And the real reason why Ted is telling his kids this story is because he's trying to work up the courage to ask for their blessing to try dating Robin again. And that's where the story ends, with a divorced Robin and a widower Ted rekindling an old flame together. Okay, if I had just finished season 1 of this show, and somebody came up to me and described to me how it ended, my reaction probably would have been, that's brilliant. And if you haven't seen the show, you might have heard my summary and thought, oh, that sounds pretty clever. It explains why the story started with Ted meeting Robin, and why it took so long to actually get to the point where Ted meets the mother. Now that Ted has had the chance to settle down and have kids, the one big barrier to him getting together with Robin is gone. It all lines up so nicely. At least in theory. The writers definitely planned for this to be the ending from way early on. They even filmed a lot of the finale alongside season 1. It was a solid idea. The issue is that over the course of 9 seasons, the characters and plot matured, grew organically, until it all got to a point where that originally planned ending no longer really fit. The show spent pretty much its entire second half beating us over the head with the fact that Ted and Robin aren't meant to be. And it spent several seasons developing Barney and Robin's relationship. And in case anyone's thinking it, no, it wasn't like a shipping war situation where people were mad just because they liked one couple over the other. It was that the show told us time and time again, as crystal clearly as possible, that no, Ted and Robin would never be together, and that Barney and Robin were the perfect couple.
Barney, wait.
I have to let go now.
I know you do.
The entire final season was specifically about Barney and Robin's wedding. It was a deep dive into what makes them work as a couple, and how they were destined to be together. Then the finale, in the space of less than an episode, went, oh actually Barney and Robin got divorced, and Ted and Robin are together now. Total emotional whiplash. The show slowly strayed away from that initial premise of Ted and Robin's romance as it went on. By the final season, that original ending no longer made sense, but the writers felt obligated to staple it on anyway. That's the thing about TV. A show is the combined effort of lots of different people collaborating on a story for an extended period of time. When a show goes on for long enough, sometimes the original vision can change. And if it does, the writing has to change with it. I don't have a good answer to what How I Met Your Mother should have done differently with its ending. I just know that the ending that they went with was wrong for the overall story.
Dad, can't you just skip ahead to the part where you meet Mom? I feel like you've been talking for like a year.
I've got one more show I want to talk about, and its ending is definitely the weirdest. The Sopranos was a critically acclaimed show about mob boss Tony Soprano, as he juggled being a family man, running the mafia, and dealing with his own mental health issues by secretly seeing a therapist. This is the final scene of the show. Yep, it just cuts off like that, without warning. The ending is so infamous that there are probably a lot of people out there who only know The Sopranos as that show with the ending that randomly cuts to black at the end. I think the reasons why people might have been mad about this are pretty self-evident. The show doesn't even end, it just stops. Why did the show end like this? Most people's first instinct is to say that this is meant to imply that Tony Soprano died in this moment, and that this sharp cutoff is meant to show how, when you're in the mob, your life can be snuffed out without warning at any time. I tend to subscribe to a slightly different interpretation. Throughout the show, Tony frequently toys with the idea of leaving organized crime, but never does. Early in the final episode, Tony's therapist, Dr. Melfi, decides to drop him as a client, saying that after all this time, she no longer has any faith that she can help him. Dr. Melfi was the strongest thing pulling Tony away from the mob, and and without her, he has no chance of ever leaving. He didn't necessarily die in the final shot, but he might as well have. Nothing after that point matters. He's going to live the rest of his life doing horribly evil things until someday he eventually gets whacked. There's no point in us watching anymore. We all know how this is going to go. This ending definitely has more people in support of it than the other endings I've mentioned. I'd attribute that to how bold it was to make such a big artistic choice like that. That, and now that the show is over, people go in knowing the ending so they can brace for potential disappointment. But still, even though not everyone hated it, why end the show like this? To answer that, I'm going to ask the same question I asked about Game of Thrones. Is it possible to have a satisfying ending in the first place? Taken as a whole, The Sopranos doesn't have a whole lot of plot progression. Sure, there are season-long story arcs, and characters die or change, but there's never much of a sense that the entire show is building towards something. The closest thing we get is that Tony starts seeing a therapist in the pilot and stops seeing her in the finale. What could we really expect from an ending? Tony is locked in a cycle of self-destructive tendencies with no real way out. There was no way to end the story with a serious disruption of the status quo. If the writers hadn't put the infamous cut to black at the end, I'm confident that the ending would have been super underwhelming in the worst way. Still, that's not to say that I think that the cut to black was a perfect or ideal way to end the show. I can totally see why so many people were upset or disappointed by it.
Go! Get out! Go, 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 go!
Whoa. Tony marries Dr. Melfi? Mamma mia!
I have a theory about the endings of stories in general that I like to call the 5-second, 5-minute rule. Basically, my thinking is that a lot of your lingering feelings about a story's ending come from your initial gut reaction 5 seconds after it happens, and your reaction once you've gotten 5 minutes to process it. Even if you think back to it later and change your perspective, those first impressions do a lot to establish your emotional attachment going forward. A good example of how that played out for me was Avengers: Infinity War. I was totally floored by the cliffhanger ending when I saw it in the theater. While the credits were rolling, I kept thinking, no way, that didn't just happen, oh my god! When I thought about it later that day though, I realized, oh wait, obviously all those characters won't stay dead, so that means that everything that happened was kind of meaningless. You'd think that would sour my opinion of the movie, but no, I still think of Infinity War very positively. And I think that it has everything to do with the fact that while I watched it, it swept me up in the excitement, and for those few minutes, it didn't occur to me to consider whether any of it made sense. For The Sopranos, I think this effect played out in reverse for a lot of people. It doesn't matter if you can look back years later and consider how creative and symbolic the ending was. What sticks with you emotionally is that 5 seconds after you saw it, you were thinking, oh man, did my TV break? And 5 minutes after that, you were thinking, wait, that was it? I don't get it.
Have you ever seen a show all of a sudden just go blank, and that's it? Never.
On YouTube, jokesters were making alternate endings to the Sopranos finale, adding dialogue.
Am I dead? Man, those onion rings were good.
Those are some of the most controversial endings in TV history. Although there are definitely other shows that I also could have talked about. I haven't watched Dexter, but I keep hearing that its ending is a disaster. Feel free to complain about any other shows in the comments. Now, what can we learn from these shows? What do they have in common? And what do they tell us about the nature of stories and their relationship to their audience? The key feature that links all these examples together is audience expectation. All of these shows had viewers who watched all the way through and, based on the progression and tone of the story, developed a rough idea of what an ending should look like. It's not like they went in with specific plot points in mind, but an ending should feel like payoff to whatever the rest of the story built up. All 4 examples I covered here wound up in an impossible position of being unable to pay off what they had set up. Game of Thrones and The Sopranos both had premises that were designed to go on forever and never end, so any ending would inevitably feel hollow. And Lost and How I Met Your Mother had both gone on for so long and had drifted so far from their initial premises that there was no way to reconcile where the story began and where the story was by the end. As a storytelling medium, TV is funny that way. Shows are designed to go on indefinitely, not necessarily to have a beginning, middle, and end. The very act of telling a serialized story like that, introducing plot points to be resolved at a later date, is a risk from the get-go. Looking at it through that lens, it's a miracle that any TV ending is good. Even if a story's ending flops and makes people mad, that's not entirely a bad thing. If people are mad, it means they care. And that at least means that the show achieved the one thing that every story needs to achieve, and that's to make an emotional connection with its audience. So you can hope for your favorite show to have a great ending, but it might be more productive to focus on